Hello, welcome to the Theology Pugcast. We are still at the PCA General Assembly in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and we're at the SHM Architects booth here. We're really glad that SHM has sponsored our presence here, and thank you to all those folks there at that great firm. Anyway, I'm C.R. Wiley. I'm a pastor. I serve a church in the Pacific Northwest. I've written a number of books. I was a professor of philosophy for about a decade at the college level, and I am senior editor at Touchstone Magazine. All right, Glenn.
I'm Glenn Sunshine. I am a retired Renaissance and Reformation historian. I am a senior fellow at the Colson Center for Christian Worldview, and I have my own ministry, Every Square Inch Ministries, at esquareinch.org.
Okay, well, we're going to be talking about recovering or reclaiming institutions, and we've got a couple of guys with us today who really believe that this is worth doing. So, William Wolfe, great to have you. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for letting a Baptist into the PCA General Assembly. William Wolfe, interestingly enough, I grew up PCA.
Oh, wow.
I went to Christ Covenant Church growing up in Matthews, North Carolina. I'm a graduate of Covenant College.
Wow.
In God's kindness and His sovereign plan for my life, I actually was converted after college, I believe.
Okay.
And so I say when I became a Christian, I naturally became a Baptist. And so I've been a Baptist since 2012. I spent 10 years living and working in Washington, D.C., where I was at Capitol Hill Baptist Church, there under the ministry of Mark Dever, and I worked in politics. I worked for 3 different members of Congress, a political organization, Heritage Action, served 4 years in the first Trump administration.
Yeah.
During that time, I realized that the way that Christians are dealing with politics seems off.
Yeah.
And looking at people like Russell Moore, David French.
Yeah.
So after the first Trump administration, I went to seminary at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, got my MDiv, and then I got connected with American Reformer during that time. I've been sort of working with them from the start, and American Reformer has this project of trying to help Protestants in particular both have a more aggressive and influence in public life, but also to equip conservative evangelical Christians to fight for their institutions. Out of that work, we've launched the Center for Baptist Leadership, which I run. And here's a good analogy for it, because we're at the PCA. I think the goal of it is ultimately going to be something like a GRN in the SBC.
Okay.
I can code switch this a little bit. When I talk to political people, I say Center for Baptist Leadership is like a House Freedom Caucus for the Southern Baptist Convention. We're trying to make sure they stay theologically faithful and conservative, but also equip them to be forward-leaning in the civic sphere. So that's what we're doing with Center for Baptist Leadership.
And you guys were just recently at that convention, the SBC.
That's right.
So maybe we can get into a little bit about how things are going there.
I could talk all day about that.
And then we also have Michael Foster, a friend of the show, although I don't know if we've ever had you on.
I've never been on, no. I've just been around.
That's right. We've known each other for years.
Yeah, I'm always in the background somewhere.
So let folks know, maybe don't know who you are.
Sure, I'm the senior pastor of East River Church in Batavia, Ohio, just outside of Cincinnati. I'm a director at Maddox, which is a company. I'm a bivocational pastor. And married 22 years, 8 kids, more chickens than I can reasonably justify. I'm a kite in God's hurricane.
I like the way you put that. And you have some fascinating sort of stuff in your history. I don't know if you want to get into that.
I've got been in... I used to be a professional card counter.
We should do a show just on card counting someday.
There's a lot of lessons that was learned, that's for certain. So I've been kicked out of over 100 casinos.
And just a few churches.
A few churches sometimes, I used to rent from a serial killer that got arrested while I was renting from him. And they made a documentary about that.
So you've been documented twice.
4 times. 4 times, actually.
I'm not entirely sure I'm happy about you as a guest right now.
Well, I wasn't happy about that serial killer as a landlord, so.
Okay, a landlord. Wow. So I'm a landlord. I felt the need to kill people, but I never actually did it.
I'm not so sure how I feel about being a guest right now.
Anyway, well, this is a fun subject, and maybe a good way to get into it is here we are at the PCA General Assembly, and I have quipped that the PCA is the first church of middle management. In other words, we're really good at smoothing over things, but we're not really good at leading things when it comes to cultural matters. We don't take the lead. We basically just go along with, I guess, what the people in charge say we should do. And that's kind of what you expect of middle management, basically applying the kind of the managerial or sort of policy decisions of higher ups. But we don't really think of ourselves as sort of being in that world. Now, maybe in the evangelical world, we think of ourselves as maybe leading the way. But when it comes to the larger culture, I don't know if we're really comfortable with that. People who exercise leadership and maybe stir things up and make people uncomfortable tend to make PCA people uncomfortable. That's kind of our problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So anyway, as I've thought about this, so last night we were at, all of us were at the American Reformer event. That was, and I'm actually on the advisory board for American Reformer. I've written for American Reformer. I like the people involved there. But American Reformer has kind of a reputation for kind of pushing things in different ways to try to pursue what we think would be worthwhile pursuing and changing things. And an example would be there was some controversy surrounding Grove City College. I don't know if you guys remember that. But my daughter is an alumnus of Grove City College. My son-in-law, her husband, is an alumnus. I've got friends on the faculty there. And there were some things that were done to kind of bring Grove City College into the spotlight in a way that made them unhappy. But the sort of the end of the story is that I think it was effective. Maybe we didn't see everything we wanted to see come out of that, but we saw some things happen that I think are encouraging. But they still don't like us, and I don't think they ever will. So now I was talking to one of the guys behind American Reformer about it, and his hope is that maybe down the road they will. Maybe they'll give someone in American Reformer an honorary doctorate in 20 years or something like that. But in the meantime, you're going to get kind of people aren't just going to, they're not going to be happy with you because you're pushing and you're making them uncomfortable. Can we do it any other way though? Or should we just expect that reforming things, changing things for the better, calling people to account is just going to mean conflict? It's going to mean confrontation. It's going to mean people being unhappy with you. And you're going to get attacked for doing that kind of stuff. So anyway, this is a softball. I'm lobbing it to you guys to kind of tell me what you think. And I anticipate that you kind of see things this way, but maybe you don't.
I think a lot of pastors belong to a sort of managerial class, right? So they come in and there's a system that exists and managers manage and maintain a system. And anyone that's a threat to the system is a threat to them. They take it very personal. Yeah. And that's why, like during COVID, so many of these pastors who are kind of like nice guy pushovers became authoritarian overnight. Yeah. Right. Like they became authoritarian overnight because you're messing with the system. They don't know what to do. Yeah. They don't know how to operate outside of that. And because a lot of them don't have any institutional experience outside of seminary and be a youth pastor and an intern somewhere, but they haven't really had any business experience or even like a nonprofit or whatever. So they don't know how to really think on their feet and deal with the system that's disrupted. Yeah. I think that really revealed how weak many of our pastors are. And they may be good men. They just weren't prepared for that world, right? It's not. It doesn't have to all be animus or something like that, but more of just they're managers, and you need managers because if you're a founder or something, you're always seeing new opportunities, chasing it. You can wear everyone out. And I think that's why most change comes from, at least in the PCA, most of the changes really come from RUF and church planning. Because that's where things are, new cultures being created, whatever. And so that's why I like some of these guys, they love Tim Keller because he's out there pushing church planning, whatever. But that's also why Tim Keller ended up having so much cultural influence, I think, in the PCA, because he raised up people that are building things. And out of that influence, when you build something, you can actually start reforming existing institutions. And that's a lot of the tension I think we feel.
Well, I've joked that I never saw Tim Keller at a General Assembly, but he was present at every one of them. Yeah, sure. The ghost of Tim Keller haunts us even to this day. Now, in the SBC, are you received with gladness and smiles, William, or do you experience a little bit tell us about what you're up to and maybe what your hopes are and how it's being received.
Yeah. So first, I want to say that I'm always surprised by the conservatives, so to speak, or the self-identified conservatives in institutions who always want to promise there are no liberals here.
Yeah.
Because there will always be liberals. And
Yeah.
to what degree they're liberals is maybe up to debate. But in any institution, there are going to be people who are particularly dedicated and committed to the mission, the founding mission, and serving the core constituency of that institution without fail. I went to the GPTS lunch yesterday.
Yeah.
And that seems like an institution that's on mission
Yep.
for its core constituency. We
Right.
train pastors. They're not tacking on all these MDiv programs for counseling to get a bunch of women into the
Right.
seminary and
Right.
raise more money. They're on mission. But, at some point in the life of GBTS, there will be people who will come in and be like, well, maybe we should do this.
Yeah, right.
Maybe we should do this. Institutions move, via entropy towards mission drift.
Yeah.
Okay, so it surprises me that we don't realize this because it's also the story of the Bible. Look at Judges.
Yeah,
What
right,
happens
right.
So I have this fundamental contention that every generation has a responsibility to fight for faithfulness in their institution. And that temptation to drift and to compromise will always be present. And so when that's happening, yes, the people who start pointing out the problems are often treated as the problem and not the problem itself. It's a
Right.
very unhelpful dynamic. And I think it ties into your earlier point of how once an institution is created, there's all these incentive structures, particularly for the people who sort of rise through it and get positions in it to just keep going along because change could threaten their comfort.
Right.
And so, yes, if you're saying we need to button down this doctrinal hatch that's leaking towards the left, you're going to have problems because there'll be really nice, good Christian guys who are on that leaking side.
Yeah.
Or if you're saying, in the Southern Baptist Convention, we've been arguing for increased financial transparency. I will say one of the very interesting things going from the SBC annual meeting in Dallas to this PCA General Assembly is just the size difference. It was a small convention for us and we had 10,000 people there. So we have, the Southern Baptist Convention manages hundreds of millions of dollars given into this pot, and the churches want a little more insight into how that money's being spent.
Right.
And that's being met with fierce opposition from the power brokers.
So this is an interesting dynamic. I was just in the business meeting of the PCA right now, the General Assembly, and they're going line by line through the budget of the missions organization. And I just heard someone propose a 10% decrease in the director's salary. And there were a number of seconds around the room.
Well, that'll be all right. It'll be all right.
That's good.
That's right.
You know, I think it might help to back up and just ask the question, start off with, what are institutions for?
Yeah,
Why do
okay.
we have institutions? Whenever you have a movement, doesn't matter what kind of movement it is,
Right.
it either institutionalizes or dies in a generation. It's as simple as that. Institutions exist to protect, preserve, and promote the set of ideals of their founders. So when we're looking at the Reformation, of course, they had to develop churches, they had to develop statements of faith, they had to do all of those kinds of things. But you can even look at the counterculture movement of the 60s.
Right.
If you look at that, basically, if you look at hippie culture, not much is left of it. What is left is stuff that's been institutionalized.
Right. Like Ben and
Basically,
Jerry's
sex,
ice
drugs,
cream.
and rock and roll. I mean, all of which become
Right.
institutionalized.
Right.
So you need the institutions to preserve the insights and the values and the programs of the people who initiate the movements. Now, what that means is that you develop a managerial class.
Yep.
But it also means that you've got the opposite problem, in a sense, that people who want to move in a different direction do so through institutional capture.
Right.
And so we really facing two different problems, but they're, in a sense, aspects of the same thing. The managerial class, who isn't interested in pushing new directions and things like that are consistent with the original founding principles. But you also have people coming in that are very much interested in moving away from those initial principles into new directions or into their own particular agenda
Right.
to change the institution.
Yeah.
Because the way you move culture is you grab institutions.
Yeah. Now, there, I think, are a lot of folks, particularly maybe people who are, children of the 60s, who are uncomfortable with this idea. There's a kind of anti-institution or anti-institutional bias that we have in our society. People who just want to kind of be left alone, go out and live in the Wild West, maybe homestead, take care of all of their own needs directly. Even those folks, of course, are kind of living in a fantasy world. But the point that you just made, Glenn, I think is undeniable if you just sit and think about it a little bit. We can't live without institutions. You could say that everything that's worth has any value in our culture has been instituted, right? When we think about when we think about the Lord's Supper, the words of institution. What are we talking about? Well, we're talking about what the Lord said to institute this sacrament, right? So institutions are with us. The English language is an institution, you could say. It's been instituted, and we use it to communicate. So we have to kind of get away from kind of this, I don't know, Thoreau's fantasy of like living in a cabin by ourselves on somebody else's property, by the way, and his mother still did his laundry.
I think it was Thucydides who said, "You may not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you." And that applies across the board. In all different kinds of institutions, whether or not you're going to engage in them, whether or not you want to engage with them, they're going to affect you.
Yeah, William.
Yeah, so just really quick on this. I think this is really important for Christians in denominations, because Christians, an institution is by nature a political body.
Yes,
it is a polis. It is people together working either to preserve the founding mission of that or to move it, or there's that third class that's in the institution and they just want to be in it wherever it moves.
Yeah, right.
And so when you're fighting to move it or to keep it faithful, that is by nature inherently and unavoidably a political fight. Christians, I think, in recent years have really lost sight of that. And so back to your original framing of when you come along and you try to politic in an institution for the purpose of fidelity, you're like, oh, well, you're just, you're causing trouble. It's like, well, there's no other way to do this. Like this, that gathering that's happening on the hall is a political gathering, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, and when we think about politics, we maybe think about it through the framework of, say, the political parties in the United States. And so let's not get political. That's something that sometimes people will say when they're actually trying to organize whatever. And one of the things that's been a challenge and a frustration for me, there was a loose association of sort of progressive-leaning pastors in the PCA known as the National Partnership. Yep. We all know about it because there was a document dump, and so there's, we can't say it didn't exist.
Read those emails,
That's right. And when I would try to get conservative-minded people organized, they were really naive about this stuff. They would say, well, it's all about me and my conscience and my prayer life, and I'll just go and I'll vote. And I was like, it might be a good idea for us to have some organization because they're organized. What happens when like one football team has a plan and the other doesn't? The team with the plan wins. And we just keep getting clocked and clocked and clocked because they have a plan and we don't have a plan. But there's this sort of fundamental conviction, I think, at least in the PCA, but I suspect in other places, that being organized is somehow a betrayal of how things are supposed to work.
Yeah. Maybe I could take this conversation to the next level.
Sure.
So I'm here because I used to be in the PCA. I got ordained in Calvary Pres down in South Carolina, and I moved back home to Cincinnati, and I thought I was kind of done with vocational ministry at all. I was just going to write books and work for Maddox and live a simple life. And then 2020 happened.
Yeah, right.
And then I watched institutional failure. All these churches wouldn't open up. They wouldn't gather. There was churches having lotteries for people to attend worship. It was insane. and I
have the winning ticket.
I appreciate any church member that's willing to enter a lottery to go worship. I just don't appreciate their pastors.
That's right.
Anyhow, that's what got me to plant East River at the time. And that was just coming off one of the worst years in the PCA ever. 2019, where you're
Yeah,
like,
the debacle in Dallas.
yeah,
Right.
why can't you discipline these people?
Right.
Because that's one of the major purposes of an institution, is to discipline people, to bring them back in line with the mission, right? Or our confession, our BCO. So then I joined the CREC, which made new friends, new enemies. It was all it was an experiment of sorts. And then we found ourselves at odds with them because we just disagree on sacraments in a major way, which is related to discipline.
Yeah, right.
Which is a big issue. So then now we're an independent Reformed church, and we thought about starting some sort of network like a Reformed Acts 29 with some discipline elements. But as soon as I started helping other church plants do discipline in there, I was like, this is beyond my ability.
Yeah.
And to build this infrastructure, thinking through how to do trials and all that stuff was incredible. In that moment, I was like, you know what? This isn't for me. I can't do all these things and do this. This is why you have to fight for institutions.
Right.
And I realized that I feel like 2019 was a good excuse to maybe move on to other pastors. But it was eye-opening that I can't give these things up, like the PCA.
Right.
Like, I don't know if I can come back in and help reform it towards its mission. I hope that's what we can do as a church, but you have to fight for these institutions.
Yeah.
The reason they're being taken over is because they're so valuable.
Right.
And the idea that you would just go run away
Right.
and let these people take over this system of power where they
Right.
can abuse discipline.
Right.
Right. And
Right.
so that's why one reason I'm here. That's why I like your work in the SBC. I think it's a one way to honor your fathers and to protect your grandchildren. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
So all those, go
the
ahead,
basic
Glenn.
problem, I think, is a combination of the great American heresy of individualism and pietism.
Yeah, right.
That on the conservative side, these are the things that they think are important, which is why they don't organize, which is why they don't do these other things. And then when they do, they get attacked roundly by the left because the left figures that's their province, and
Yeah,
they
that's right.
can use
That's right.
and they can use our own ideals against us.
Right,
So that,
right.
that I think is genuinely what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, William.
Four quick points.
Yeah.
One, the first thing I was going to say, and Michael hit it, was fighting for institutions is a dutiful work of the fifth commandment, honoring your fathers. Like our fathers in the faith knew what they were doing when they built the PCA, when they built the Southern Baptist Convention. Some of our fathers in the faith had to go and build new things like the PCA because of compromise in the PCUSA. And then you have to be very careful, I think, about the infinite regress of institutional abandonment.
Right.
And that's a temptation to conservatives to just constantly, we build something, the left takes it over, let's go build something new,
Right.
rinse and repeat. So honor your fathers and fight for institutions. Two, Michael says, why can't we win? Well, it's the mushy middle.
Yeah.
The biggest problem in institutional reclamation is never really the left that's trying to lead it in the wrong direction. It's the mushy middle that feels so mean, drawing disciplinary lines against people.
Yeah, right.
Your point about what happened at the PCA in Dallas, why can't we discipline these people? You can't discipline those people, not because they're outside the bounds, but because the mushy middle won't acknowledge that middle ground. Third point is that because it's a political battle, one of the things I've noticed is that the left seems better at the right in institutions at being political without being obviously political.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about this. I mean, here I am saying it's a political fight. Yes, but how can the right be more political without looking political? I think would be a very important thing. And so, that was three, and I'll leave it at that.
No, this brings up something that has been observed by people, and that's the difference between lions and foxes when it comes to leadership. I don't know if you're familiar with this. Basically, there are always lions and there are always foxes in any institution. So let's just think about a chessboard. What you have with the bishop is a fox. It's a diagonal move. So you're coming at something from an oblique angle. I can't help but think that the people behind chess, when it formed, and they thought about the character of different pieces, said that's the appropriate move for a bishop. So, but I think that the left has perfected the fox move. And generally, people like, say, Donald Trump, it's a lion. He just kind of comes right at you. Now I actually think he's much more foxy than people give him credit for. I think that he's very savvy, but he's savvy in a bold way. He puts you on the defensive all the time. And he comes at you with so many different things. You're not really sure where to respond. And then when you do, you look stupid because then you say, no, that's not what happened. And then 2 weeks later, it's like everybody knows that's exactly what happened. So he's brilliant in all those ways. But this whole thing, sometimes I think when we finally get fed up, and we saw this in the PCA, following the debacle in Dallas, which is when you had the Side B Christianity thing finally kind of blow up. And I remember Greg Johnson's, I think he spoke on the floor, and there was a response from a certain part of our denomination, or sort of the people assembled there, the delegates. It sounded like a bunch of squealing girls at a high school pep rally. I was just like, I am just appalled, just even at a visceral level with this response. What is going on? And then some guys we both know said, that's it, I'm out.
Yep.
But that was finally like the last straw for a lot of guys. And in mass, the ruling elders came out. And over the last 4 years or so, there has been a significant, I think, move in a good direction in the PCA.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, it's not maybe where we all wish it would be, but it's certainly not what it was in 2019. Things have changed. Greg Johnson's not even in our denomination anymore. He's gone. So there have been some positive developments, but I think we might
traded Johnson for Everhard.
That's right.
Right, Johnson went to the EPC, I think. And we got Matt. It's a good trade.
Yeah, we
Take
just
it every
had
day of
Matt on the
week,
show.
yeah.
We had a great conversation.
Yeah, one of
go
the
ahead.
facts about church history is, and I don't care what church it is or when we're talking about, always you can look at the church with, I suppose, three groups. You've got the people who are committed to the church and its mission, and who want to move in that direction. You have, I call those typically reformers, because the other group is the group that tends to be wanting to use the church for its own purposes.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you've got the people in the middle. So this condition of a church at any period in time depends on whether the first or the second group has the upper hand.
Yeah.
When the people who want to use the church for their own purposes, whether that's an idealistic purpose or more likely power or money, if they've got the upper hand, you've got a period where the church is corrupt.
Right.
If the first group, which is why I call the first group the reformers, if they've got the upper hand, the church is in pretty good shape. But that doesn't mean that there aren't people there who are trying to use it for its own purposes. Both of them are always present. Just which one has the upper hand.
Right.
It makes me think of a bus. This is sort of a rough analogy, but let's say reformers, deformers, and passengers.
Yeah.
So who has the wheel?
Right.
The deformers and the reformers are up at the front of the bus, fighting for the wheel. Year over year. Everyone's on everyone's back riding along. When the deformers get the wheel, at some point the reformer is going to have to probably knock that guy out and take the bus.
Right.
It's like otherwise we're going to go over the cliff. But when you go punch that guy in the driver's seat, everyone's going to scream, "What are you doing? You look like a bad guy." It's like I'm trying to stop us from going off a cliff.
Right.
So maybe you will thank me later because the prophets weren't killed, for being wrong. They were killed for being first.
Yeah. But that's I guess maybe what provides us with an appropriate set of expectations. Getting back to my earlier point about, what happened with Grove City College. So there was a prophetic role that I think the American Reformer played in calling that school to account, because it's a significant school and it's got an important, I think, a history when it comes to higher education in the United States, particularly with like blazing the trail for like saying no to federal dollars and stuff like that. It's had a lot of great, history and things to be proud of. But then, there are some things that occur on campus that make you wonder what is going on. And then people call them to account. But then you've got the people who are the passengers who are saying, that's my school. What are you doing attacking my school? We got to, rally the troops or circle the wagons or whatever you want to say. But I actually do think that, with time, they do make statues about prophets, but after they're gone.
Right.
Right. That's what I was
Jesus
getting
had
at
something
with,
to say about that. You build the tombs of the prophets.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's what I was getting at with regard to maybe some guys, maybe Josh will get like a honorary doctorate someday.
Well, so let me try to bring the gospel to bear on this conversation, because we're dealing with this in Southern Baptist Convention. And I was at the beach with my family the other week, and I was thinking about the last 10 plus years of American evangelicalism, SBC, PCA, broader evangelicalism, other denominations. And it's like, I was asking myself, has there been a single historical major, and those are loose categories, I don't have buttoned down, conservative evangelical denomination that didn't compromise in some way on the unholy trinity of LGBTQ issues, BLM, DEI, CRT issues, or feminism, right? It's always those three. It's those three in modern history. And I was like, well, the SBC certainly did. The PCA certainly did. Side B, Resolution 9 and SBC. You see Anglican Church, whatever. It's like, man, I'm not sure that there is.
Yeah.
And so as you have to, when you have to go and you have to push back against this stuff, here's where the gospel comes in. I don't know why Christians in leadership and institutions can't admit they got something wrong.
Yeah,
we'll forgive you, brother.
Right.
It's like, hey, we shouldn't have let. I'm sorry, and I won't name it. I'm sorry I let this egalitarian feminist on my podcast for so long, subverting the teaching in this institution or in the SBC. I'm sorry that we let Russell Moore, do what he did. I'm sorry we did these things. Please forgive us. We made a mistake. We forsook our mission for a popular thing at the time to appeal to, quite frankly, some identitarian minority group. Forgive us. It's like, and with the Grove City thing, it's like this. It's like the people in charge, the conservatives, it seems like they can't say, I'm sorry, I got it wrong. And I would love to see people try that.
Right.
Just be like, hey, I messed up. Please forgive me. Christ forgives me. Will you forgive me? Let's get back on mission together. So it's like, how can we get the gospel back into this conversation? I think Tom Askell in the Southern Baptist Convention is really good at that. He says we have an allergy or a fearness of asking for forgiveness and confession, and I think, we're Christians.
Right.
We have Christ,
Yeah, I like Tom. He's a good guy. When it comes to this matter, maybe there's a fear that somehow this blemishes the sterling reputation of the institution, that this will be something that we'll never be able to kind of live with, I think about the fact that, schools just pretend things didn't happen, even though they're internally making the changes that are being called for. That's what I'm kind of getting at with Grove City. But I'm using Grove City because it's I think it's true that they're in a better place than they were a few years ago, and I can see that the American Reformer has something to do with that. But this happens all the time, all over the place. Not just with churches, but with corporations. Like, Budweiser did some really stupid stuff, and really regrets it.
Yeah.
But they never came out and said that was stupid. But now their commercials are all different, and they're trying to kiss up and make friends.
Now we have Shane Gillis instead of Dylan Mulvaney.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, the big example of this that jumps out to me is the sexual abuse scandals in the Catholic Church.
Yes, right.
Their initially, especially, their desire to protect the reputation of the institution led them to sweep things under the rug, move abusing priests from one diocese to another, and so on, until eventually you got a lavender mafia, in key positions within the church that just made the whole situation worse.
Right.
But everything was built around the premise of damage control.
Right. Damage control.
That is the initial instinct. Let's not make this public. Let's just
right, and keep it in house.
That's managerial, that PR.
Yeah,
and you saw that in how churches dealt with COVID, and again, the sort of emails they sent out are these very PR-ish sort of emails. Yeah,
right.
Well, and I think it also Catholic Church may be a little bit different, but the evangelical world, obviously, church as a business. The business model of church, pastor as CEO, that ethos has infected so much of evangelicalism. And it's like, brothers, we're not shareholders. Like we don't have a stock here. Like you can admit a mistake, confess it, repent, and like our stock prices aren't going to go down. Actually, in the Christian economy, when you do that, your stock goes up over time.
Yeah.
God bless this humility.
Right.
I think people need to learn one thing. So we got to get more people involved in worthwhile institutions, whether it's PCA or SBC, and they need to understand that whales get barnacles on them.
Yeah.
Right. Ships get barnacles on them.
Yeah, that's a good.
As just part of it.
Yeah.
You got to take those things off. And the church always exists on a spectrum to less pure, to more pure. And some are so, messed up that they're truly a synagogue of Satan. If that's the case, you have a responsibility to leave at that point.
Right.
But there's a quest for, like, what I see with a lot of people that are kind of black-pilled right now. Well, that guy's not a good enough, moderator or this or whatever. Or here's this bad guy in this denomination, therefore I should give up on it.
Yeah.
That's just part of it, man.
Yeah.
Like, the question is, do we have a way forward to have influence, to do reformation, and then go take it. Stop being a sissy. Or what are you doing right now?
Yeah.
What are you building right now? Someone's got to build something. If you build it, then maybe your grandson will have the spine you don't to defend what you build.
Right.
And you have to make those decisions at a certain point. And it's easy to lose heart, but I think we have to let these younger people know, come in, we can win these things if we get organized, and you just don't care about your reputation like they do. Care about the reputation of Christ, and amazing things can happen.
So I'm in a really good spot now of pastoring a church that went through a really rough period for an extended period of time, but it was a purifying process, and the church is in a really good place now. Where there's a lot of peace and a lot of growth, and just it's a low maintenance situation. In other words, I almost feel guilty because I don't have a crisis.
That's great.
But the church and its leadership went through some, and you know this story.
Yeah, I do.
But it did have a lingering effect at creating a reputation for the church that now we're having to deal with. So when people think about our church, they think about that period of time, not the way it is today. And what I've tried to share with our folks is it's going to take a while for people to get used to thinking of us in a new way. And some people will just have to die. They'll never let go of what happened in the past. But I think our leadership handled themselves with a real character, and they were principled, and they didn't back down. No matter what came their way, they didn't back down, and they pursued the purity of the church. And the church was purified in the process, but it also came out kind of bruised. But we're in a really good spot now. A lot of that stuff is just behind us, and we're kind of building a new kind of public image. People, the people who don't know about those years think about us very differently than the people who do remember those years.
One more thought on this is that, so my goal for our church is for it to be intergenerational. So for the mission to be accomplished, I'll be dead. I have to be able to hand it off to my children and then hand it off to the grandchildren for it to be a 3-generation church is what I'm hoping for. I don't think that can be preserved without institutions, because they bring accountability and discipline to the courts of the church and all that sort of stuff. But so people out there building right now, they should go look at the emerging church, right? The emerging church popped up for 5 years, 7 years, no institutions, wrote some big selling books, right? New Way to Be a Christian. No one cares about Brian McLaren.
No one
cares about any of those guys. And so you can actually have a ton of momentary influence. I mean, that was everything back then. Those
I remember it.
Doug Padgett. I can go through all these books. They were selling at least tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of copies. Nothing. No lasting real influence. Other than they're fun to make fun of.
And for those of us who remember them. But people don't even remember them.
So you can have books right now like, hey, and this has been a big question I've asked, what came out of the pandemic era? Like, what's the new institution? American Reformer, in my mind, is one of the better ones that have come out of that. CBL's in the same, doing the same thing. But mostly these books, we need to either start something new or plop down somewhere, or all the energy that came out of the pandemic era is going to go to waste. And that's what I think that's what 2025 is about in my mind. Is people like, okay, that's over, and now what?
Well, so, I mean, I love American Reformer because American Reformer is a new thing with a mission on helping preserve existing things. It's a pretty nimble organization. It's a journal, so it was trying to fill a gap, a need left behind by many perceived in the Protestant Reformed world in particular, if you're not happy with the Gospel Coalition, if you're not happy with Christianity today, where are you going to get good Protestant, resources, and also trying to, again, sort of the loss of Protestant civic and theological leadership in America is the loss of an institution in and of itself.
Right.
It's the institution that built this country, and we have collectively ceded it to Catholics. And that ties into the political aspect that we're focused on, not just reforming the church, but trying to equip Protestants to be civic leaders and reclaim what we believe is in many ways our birthright in leadership in American life. Foster is right, though, that you do this work. So 2 points off of what you said and then Foster said is you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. If you're going to do institutional reform, you have to have a stomach for conflict. You don't need to be unnecessarily confrontational, but you have to have a stomach for conflict and be willing to be in it for a while, uncomfortable, and not just cut and run. On my comments after the SBC, the last few years we've been working on this, leave it to the goats, leave it to the goats. They're gone, it's gone, it's gone. Dude, it's the biggest mission-sending organization in the world. The PCUSA recently brought home their last missionary. I don't want that to be the epithet that that hangs
we're actually glad the PCUSA did that.
Yeah, that's right. So you got to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And then, I recently saw the last Mission Impossible movie, Final Reckoning. And, the quote that gets used throughout it is, we live and die in the shadows for those we hold dear and for those we never meet. Right, and that's exactly what Foster was saying. It's like you steel yourself for the uncomfortable work of being unpopular at times for institutional reclamation and reform because you're saying, will my children inherit this? I mean, one of the most fundamental things that drives my work in the Southern Baptist Convention is I have 3 boys. Hopefully, I'll have more children as we go on, but I have 3 boys right now. When they're in their 20s, if they were lost like I was in their sin, will they meet a random Southern Baptist pastor who will share the gospel with them?
Amen.
Or not? That's what's on the line here. It makes me emotional. It's like that's what's on the line in what we're doing.
Yeah, that's really important. Now, we just had Jake Dell. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Jake, but he's working in New England. He's a Yalie, and he's a pastor of a church in Woodbury, Connecticut. An old UCC, basically United Church of Christ. In New England, the joke is Unitarians considering Christ. Just about every UCC church is just draped in rainbow flags and stuff like that. But he's a conservative. He was kicked out of the Episcopal Church for being too conservative. Now he's there. And he's got a dream of kind of reclaiming mainline churches. When we think about the guy like the Redeemed Zoomer, I've heard about, I don't know much about him. But I think that's kind of the shtick, basically the idea that we shouldn't give up on the main line. When does it become quixotic? I mean, how far does an institution have to go before you say, okay, it's done, and I'm out? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. I grew up doing MMA, and I can think of getting in a fight with a guy much bigger and more talented than me, and getting my butt kicked, and I couldn't stop him. I had just nothing I could do. Couldn't land a punch. When I kicked him in his leg, hurt my leg worse than his. I really have a soft bone bruise where I thought that was going to be it. I thought I had it. The only way you can find out if you stand a chance is to engage and go for it. And if after conflict after conflict, you haven't gained any ground, it's getting worse, no one else is rising to your call, there's a certain point where you just have to make a judgment call, and it's always going to be subjective. And you just have to if someone is leaving the SBC or the PCA, I would try to stop them, but I also wouldn't judge them for it either. And every man has to know. Well, every man's got to know what their tolerance level is. And if you're leaving because this is a distraction from my church or whatever, I get that. But to find out if you can win, you have to fight. And you have to engage. And the problem with the PCA is it's full of Southern gentlemen. And they don't win wars, as we've seen. And
well, they were a different kind of Southern gentleman back in those days.
Well,
we need to engage and draw some blood.
I think the key thing that you said in there is gaining ground. Because if you look at someone like William Wilberforce, it took him 20 some odd years of introducing the bill to abolish the slave trade every year until he finally won. But he was gaining ground the entire time. And he was doing that really through a whole series of approaches to start swaying public opinion. And eventually he won. But
Yep.
if he wasn't looking at that question of gaining ground, Wilberforce would probably have continued anyway, given who he was. But I could see that it would have been really easy to throw in the towel. But the fact that he was gaining ground meant that the fight, he was winning the fight.
Yeah, if he couldn't land this kick, he went for the punch, tried to take him to the ground. He's coming at from different angles, and I don't think most people try it from every angle. They abandon because it's hard and it's exhausting, and they get discouraged. And but you have to try everything,
I think there's actually a pretty clear sort of answer to this question when it comes to institutional reform in a Christian denomination or in a church. And it's, does being a part of this denomination or this institution require me to compromise where it's a sin? Just because there are things happening in the denomination itself that I don't like or I disagree with or I think is compromise or is sin, can I still lead my church in a faithful way? Right. I think that's one of the, so it's like, for Jake, I love Jake's mission, but, if I were to say I wanted to reform the American Baptist Church,
right.
The American Baptist Church was one of the first churches in the country to ordain a transgender minister. So it's like, would there be a single, if I was like, I want to retake the American Baptist Church, not the Southern Baptist Church, is there a single American Baptist church that I could go and join that I wouldn't be subjecting myself to sort of aberrant theology, sinful compromise? If there was only one Lord, is there one? If there was one faithful American Baptist Church congregation that I could in a good conscience take my family into and sit under their teaching, and be a part of, well then maybe, right? But it's like when you look at the main lines, and look, I appreciate. I mean, we're sitting here talking about reclaiming institutions. I don't want to dump on those brothers, but it's like is if you can't be in it without compromising yourself and being forced to, I think that's when you have to cut and leave. So in the Southern Baptist Convention, there's lots of stuff I don't like that they're doing financially, but a church can designate its giving to an entity it trusts.
Right.
If you don't want any of your money going to the ERLC, you don't give to the cooperative program bucket that gets dispersed, you give to the IMB directly. In the PCA, you guys have you don't even give a lot of money. It's like, it sounds like your church can largely stay in, be faithful, and then you show up and represent yourself and agitate for change. So it's like, I think that's the dividing line is, can I remain uncompromised even if I think the institution is being compromised, and fight for change with a pure and clean conscience?
Yeah, the founders of the PCA were kind of bruised and bloody guys who were very, I think, reflective on, how come this turned out the way it did. And they identified a couple of what I would call thumbscrews that a liberalizing denomination can use on pastors and congregations, and they said, we're not going to have those in the PCA. And I think the building thing is one.
Yeah, that's a huge one. All constitution bylaws are full of institutional trauma.
Yeah.
When you get to a church and you read their bylaws, you're like, what's this weird little rule about? Well, that's some church conflict from 20 years ago.
Right.
But for them, it was the building thing and trying to centralization means a pot of money and bureaucracy around it. Yeah. And that's what liberals who can't make money or get authority are attracted to.
Yeah, so, that's a very good way to think about it. You can think about it like bugs in the summertime at the zapper. They just literally have a kind of like this draw. They're drawn to it irresistibly. It's like this is, like when you think about a foundation, when you think about, say, something like the Pew Foundation, Howard J. Pew, the guy who founded Sun Oil, really conservative guy, was one of the kind of the pusher, kind of the guys behind the scenes and really important figures in the history of Grove City College. But he also established Pew Charitable Trust, which today is doing stuff that he would not have any, he want to be associated with at all, But, you see that again and again particularly with foundations, because basically what you have is this huge honeypot. And, even when you think you've got it all covered with the rules about how this is supposed to be used and what it can't be used for, and liberals are really good at figuring out, ways to tweak and sort of move things in the directions that they want, identify exceptions or whatever. And the next thing you know, you got, something that's just awful, that is just having a really terrible effect on just the world at large. And it was established for something, at least ostensibly positive when it got started.
It fundamentally comes down to power, right?
Yeah.
It's like, why are they attracted to the money? Why are they attracted to the management positions and the bureaucracy? It's because it's exercise of power.
Yeah.
Conservative Christians are very allergic to power.
Yeah.
And we've been told pietistically that it's the one ring. Don't use the one ring. It's like, okay, that's not a really good analogy, but you've been duped by it.
Right.
And I watched this actually play out at the Southern Baptist Convention recently. We had after 6 years of very left presidents, they wouldn't call themselves that, but I
Sure.
would.
Right.
We have a much better president, guy Clint Presley from North Carolina. I like Clint, I know him personally, but it's his first year as a president moderating the meeting. And we have in the Southern Baptist Convention an executive committee. And so then there's a president of the executive committee. That's really like the deep state of the SBC.
Yeah, right.
And I watched this year as the president of the executive committee, Jeff Orge, really outmaneuvered Clint Presley, who had different priorities. And so Clint's technically the president, but Jeff and some of his subordinates just sort of unapologetically used power within the machine to win their way. And so it's like, if Clint listens to this, it's like, Clint, at that moment, you should have never given that guy the microphone.
Yeah.
You should have used the power that you had to help win an outcome that you wanted.
Yeah.
And so conservatives really need to, I think, get more comfortable using power to accomplish their ends within institutions, because the left is unapologetic in doing so.
Yeah, and the other part of that is a kind of naivete.
Oh, yeah.
One of the problems.
The parliamentarian doesn't have an agenda. Oh, yes, brother, he does.
That's right. Well, and there's a tendency for good-hearted people to credit other people with being equally good-hearted. There's a tendency. I don't want to read ill intent into his motives because I'm trying to do something upstanding and praiseworthy and stuff like that, and I give that person credit for that too. Well, the Lord understood what made people tick, and he didn't trust some people when they would ask him loaded questions. He wouldn't give them a straight answer.
Yeah.
He'd say, "I've got a question for you," that kind of thing. So he could play hardball. He knew how to push back, and he didn't have a problem with that. But a lot of our guys do have a hard time with that. Do have a hard time pushing back.
I was cracking up about the first day of assembly here, where I say we, so you guess where I'm at.
Yeah, it's like, you're already in.
But anyhow, where they wouldn't vote to keep lists of deacons and everything.
Yeah.
But we will keep a list of all these different racial groups.
Yeah, right.
Which ones, wait a second. And then
right.
someone laid their cards on the table and said, well, some of these racial groups have had past wrongs done to them.
Right.
I'm like, well, we're getting a little closer to what's being, if we keep lists of whether or not who the deacons are, one, we'll know if anyone's a female deacon. They're still trying to do that. Right. And two, if we start keeping this list of racial stuff, that's something that can be weaponized. It's asinine, first off. But the purpose of it is to weaponize. How can you not see that's at some level at play? It's right in front of you. You have to be willing to acknowledge that. And obviously there's a bunch of different motives, but you have to have a good, healthy suspicion that people hide their intents when they're not good.
Right, That's
Which is a biblical category.
What's that?
Which is a biblical category.
Yeah, exactly.
Deacons or racial inequities.
Deacons.
I think that, this again, it's Joe Rigney where he's talking about toxic empathy.
Yeah.
It's, somebody made a comment about Western civilization that we are in a situation where we are so secure and so safe and all of this and so stable and all these kinds of things that we find it hard to believe that there's anybody who has different values than we do. Yeah. That might, in fact, want to come in and kill us. Yeah. Those sorts of things, which is what feeds this entire, open border immigration. It's all the same kind of idea.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Well, why do liberal women love to date Muslims? Why do liberal women, why in the world do you see these liberals and Muslims who have totally different worldviews work together? Because they hate the truth. Right. And there's people out there that hate truth and are after our way of life. And what they have can be so different in so many ways, but they ultimately hate the truth of Scripture. And it doesn't matter what form it takes. There always is a corrupting force that you have to stop.
Yeah, quick historical note on that. The leftists and the Islamists worked together to topple the Shah in Iran And as soon as the Islamists took over, the first thing they did is kill all the leftists.
I bet they did.
Yeah, that's right. They're the shock troops, But I think on this, so it's like, it's not even necessarily that you have to assume ill motive on other people, but you just have to realize that people will have different goals than you do. And they might have those different goals with the best of intentions personally. And this kind of ties into just, us recovering sort of a masculine Christian appetite for debate. Look, I can't speak to the intricacies of how exactly you're supposed to talk in a PCA GA, but I mean, I didn't think, to me, Timothy Brindle wasn't out of line. When, Erwin Ince and what's going on at the MNNA with these, racially segregated gatherings, it is just insane. And we had them at SBC too. We had like 15 different racial affinity group meetings. I'm like, what are we doing? But I thought, it's like, okay, so Kevin DeYoung's going to correct him for that. It's like, are we this soft? Again, maybe it was out of line. Maybe it's not according to the rules. But, it's like we need to recover this, like, a masculine appetite of almost, it's like confrontationally assuming the best. I'm not going to tell you have ill motives. I'm just going to say I disagree to the ends that you're working for. I'm going to try to frustrate them. You disagree with the ends I'm working for. You're trying to frustrate me. Great. I love you, brother. Let's see who wins. And then go about it like that.
Yeah, I think that's a really sound point. And that's a whole other show.
Sure.
When etiquette becomes the enemy of frankness and truth. But anyway, we'll have you back for maybe that conversation. But
next
we
year
got
at the SBC convention.
Come meet in. We'll be in Orlando next year.
Right. Anyway, so we got to the point where we should wrap things up. But thanks a lot, guys, for coming on the show. It's been a fun conversation, and we'll be sure to let you know when it's out, because what we've done is we've done a bunch of shows, and so this may not be out until mid-August or so, but we'll let you know when it comes out. And thank you for listening to the Theology Pugcast. We've appreciated your time with us, or we do appreciate you spending time with us. And if you appreciate what we do have a way for you to express that appreciation. That is, we have a Patreon account, and we are always looking for people who would help us pay the bills. So the link is in the show notes, and would you consider it? We'd be very pleased if you did. All right, thanks a lot, and bye-bye.
Bye.